Tired of shoes that don't quite fit right? New Mexico Shoes has a solution. Introducing our custom insoles and arch supports made just for you and ready the same day right here in Albuquerque. Perfectly tailored to your feet, enjoy the comfort and support you need. And while you're here, explore a huge selection of top brands. From casual to athletic, we've got the perfect pair waiting for you. Visit NewMexicoShoes.com for hours and location details. All right, welcome back to another episode of Writer's Block. I am your host, Journal Staff Writer Sean Reider. Today we have a great conversation with Gabe Camarillo. He's a sports anchor and reporter for Fox 26 in Fresno. We broke down kind of Fresno State's kind of season so far, 3 games in, and their upcoming matchup against New Mexico, homecoming this Saturday. Before we get into that, though, I do want to, as always, encourage you guys to tune into our live shows that Jeff Grammer, another Journal staff writer, and I do after each New Mexico football game, and on Mondays after Bronco Mendenhall's weekly press conference. We might be adding more, depending on kind of news with conference realignment and other kind of happenings around New Mexico sports. So, want to encourage you to find those on YouTube or X. The post games are usually about 30 minutes, 40 minutes after we're done with our press conference, so really kind of the end of the game. And then the Monday live shows are usually at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. So, as always, we encourage you guys to tune in. But with that, here's Gabe Camarillo for Fox 26. All right, today I am very happy and very thankful to be joined by Gabe Camarillo. He is a sports anchor and reporter for Fox 26 News in Fresno. Gabe, thanks for coming on today, man.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Sean. It's funny because we first met on my radio show, and I feel like you kind of have your own radio show here with the Albuquerque Journal talking about New Mexico Lobos.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. Not quite radio, but a little bit kind of a similar vibe there. But in terms of talking about Fresno State, I feel like there is one thing you got to kind of talk about, at least at the start when you're talking about this season. Obviously, over the summer, former Fresno State head coach Jeff Tedford, he did step down due to health concerns. I believe that was about mid-July. Tim Skipper, who was the interim head coach for the New Mexico Bowl against New Mexico State, he is now the interim for this season as well. He's got him off to a 2-1 start. I'm just curious. I mean, when that Tedford news came out, I mean, what was kind of your initial reaction there?
I was hoping that everyone stays because in today's day and age of college football, when one coach leaves, kind of everyone leaves with them. And so this is different. Obviously, Tedford wasn't leaving for another school. He was leaving the sport that he loved after multiple instances of a medical emergency. He finally felt this was the right time. And he felt it was the right time because he, I believe, fully trusts Tim Skipper to lead the ship. And so far, he's done a good job. I mean, he's proving that he's worthy of Tedford's trust. They're 2-1. That only loss was on the road to a then number top 10 team in the country, Michigan. I feel like if not for a couple plays at the Michigan game, that could have even been closer than a 20-point loss. And so there's been nothing I've seen from Tim Skipper that makes me think he isn't the right man for the job. And that Tedford made the right decision giving him the keys when Tedford had to because of health.
Ahead of the New Mexico Bowl last year that I just said between Fresno State and New Mexico State, I mean, Skipper did all the media for that, and I thought Skipper was honestly a really interesting guy to talk to in the sense that he had already done the interim thing before when he was, I think he was linebackers coach, a defensive coordinator at Central Michigan, and Jim McElwain had a heart attack and all that. So he kind of talked about like, hey, I've been here. This is nothing particularly new to me. And I thought he was just kind of a compelling figure. In terms of, stepping into Tedford's role, what changed? How have you seen Skipper kind of handle it differently than Tedford in some ways?
The energy is a difference. I mean, Tedford was a more measured man. He was very smart. His coaching acumen, makes everything else pale in comparison. All the coaches in the Mountain West, I don't think, have the same kind of offensive mind that Jeff Tedford had. So obviously, if you're Tim Skipper, it's hard to fill that part of what Tedford brought to the table. But he brings other things to the table that Tedford didn't quite bring as much as Skipper, like energy. He's always yelling at practice in a good way, right? And he's always giving them, motivation. And he has something they call Dirty Tuesdays, which is something they didn't have with Tedford, where they play, it's their most physical football on Tuesdays any given practice week. They're trying to really embrace the old Pat Hill mentality of being physical at the line of scrimmage, hitting hard, forcing turnovers. And I think you're seeing it on the field. They forced 3 turnovers the last 2 games each. And I feel like that's because of the type of energy that Tim Skipper brings. He's a defensive guy, and so it's no surprise to see the Bulldogs defense really take what I think is a step forward in 2024 so far.
You've kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. Obviously, Fresno State opened with a 30-10 loss to Michigan at the Big House, a game that was a one-score game pretty late into the fourth quarter, I think right at under 8 minutes or so. Went on, beat a good Sac State team 46-30, and then beat New Mexico State. New Mexico Bowl rematch 48-0, kind of dominated them. Through 3 games, I mean, what have you learned about this Fresno State team?
That the defense could lose 6 starters and still be just as good. I mean, they lost some key guys. Johnny Hudson was a big plug in the middle, but they plugged in a JUCO transfer who spent last year on the bench, Kavika Bumgarner, and he's proved to be a good, solid addition so far. And then they added Corey Foreman, where they lost Isaiah Johnson last year. And Corey Foreman is a former 5-star USC transfer that had no offers going into the portal from USC, which is crazy to hear, but Corey told us that. Fresno State was his only option, and he's playing like he's grateful, right? He's grateful to be at Fresno State. It's giving him a chance. I don't want to say it's Last Chance U, but it reminds me of the Netflix series because it's a guy that was once thought to be the best defensive end in the country, and now he's showing that he still has that kind of talent. He had a sack and a big hit, a batted ball, a couple different things he did against New Mexico State last Saturday. And then the linebackers. I mean, this defense as a whole lost starters on every level. Lavelle Bailey was a huge piece of that defense, maybe the glue of that defense. And they found Tuasibi Nomura to step in and be a physical playmaker at all 3 levels, in the backfield, stopping the run. And even he can drop back in pass coverage to do a decent job. And speaking of pass coverage, I feel like the corners, they're playing really well right now. Cam Lockridge wasn't a factor last year when Fresno State played New Mexico. He was nursing an oblique strain. He was out for the last 9 games last year. And since he's been back, he has led the country, tied for the lead with 3 interceptions. And Azalian Hamilton isn't making it any easier for quarterbacks because he does a good job covering his side of the field. So this defense is what I've learned the most about the first 3 weeks. We knew what we had in the offense with Mikey Keene, but seeing the defense see so many guys step up and kind of carry the torch for when Fresno State was 8-1 last year and top 25 in the country, it was because of the defense. And I think if they reach similar heights, it'll be the defense's doing again.
Yeah, defense was kind of my question with this team heading in. I mean, you knew like Dean Clark, Malachi Langley, Devo Bridges, like guys like that were going to be back and coming in the fold. But I mean, how can you overstate the loss of a guy like Lavelle Bailey? I mean, the guy was sensational. And to me, significantly one of the better linebackers in the Mountain West. But yeah, the defense has been solid. The offense, not a ton of questions. Obviously, returning a pretty good quarterback in Mikey Keene. He's 58 for 43 this year for 814 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. How have you seen Mikey kind of handle his second season as the starter at Fresno State?
Well, I would say this. The last 2 games Fresno State's played, they've opened in very similar fashion. I think the first play of the game against Sac State and then the third play of the game against New Mexico State, they might have called the same play call. They called Magdalena going on a go route, and he beat everyone that was in front of him and scored a 69 and 75-yard touchdown in back-to-back weeks. So that tells me Mikey Keene is more aggressive. There were moments last year where he didn't go as deep often. I mean, there were glimpses like the Purdue game last year, the Boise State game last year when they beat the Broncos in Fresno, where he was letting it go. He showed the gunslinger side of him. Because of the interceptions, I'm sure that's kept him wary of going too aggressive. But this year he's letting it fly. And sure, like the first 2 weeks, he had 4 interceptions. That was a big question mark here around town. Last week, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, played a very clean game. If he continues to play clean football while getting those downfield shots in, that's what makes this offense so hard to stop. And last week he did it. Can he keep doing it, though? That's still the question out there. Can he keep taking care of the football?
It's a little easier to kind of continually let it fly and let plays develop when you have a guy like Malik Sherrod in the backfield as well. He's at 51 carries for 191 yards, 3 TDs. I mean, very good running back last year, obviously, in a Mountain West that had some pretty darn good running backs to begin with. How have you seen Sherrod kind of take the next step forward?
It took him a little while because during camp he picked up an injury and he missed a good portion of camp. And to see him suit up for Michigan, a lot of us here in Fresno knew he wasn't 100%, and it might have showed in the stat sheet. And even last A couple weeks ago against Sac State. He didn't look like himself. Picked up a lot of carries, but didn't get a lot of yards. Last week was a departure from that. He had a 48-yard run to set up one of his own touchdowns, and then he had later another 30-plus yard run against New Mexico State. And we saw what we saw last year, explosiveness. As soon as that guy gets beyond the defensive line and there's nothing but green grass, it's really hard to catch him. And so I've seen him overcome injury already. That's something that he had to do to start last year. Remember, last year he missed a game early in the year. But by the time we got into October, especially when this team went to Utah State and he had a big game, October, November is when he hit his stride. I see him hitting that stride in mid-September. So that means he's up for a big year if he can keep this going.
And then wide receiver wise, Jalen Moss is back. I think he's had 12 catches for 203 yards on the year. But I think he had 6 for 97 against Michigan. It seemed like Michigan had a lot of problems with him, to be honest with you. And then Mac Delana, 15 catches, 384 yards, 3 TDs. Kind of the head guys in that wide receiver room too. Wide receiver is hugely important in this offense. Guys like that as well with the skill sets that they bring. However, it's kind of repeat myself. How have you seen them kind of also take that next step forward?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Malik kind of overcame injury, and he's shown ability to deal with adversity. Mac Delana has shown that not just this year, but throughout his entire career. This is a guy that Kalen DeBoer in 2020, when they went to Nevada and they had nobody available to kick for COVID reasons, he told Mac Delana, I need you to kick PATs. And Mac did that. And then there were a couple of years where Mac had to take a back seat. He wasn't even kicking PATs. He was just sitting on the bench because there were other receivers that Fresno State had out there in 21 and 22. And then finally last year, for the whole season, we saw Mac unlocked. And then this year, here he is, and I think he's one of the nation's leaders in receiving yards. It's such a good story. It reminds me of Eric Brooks last year, kind of a bit of an undersized guy who can make big plays, but Mac does it more so with his speed than Eric did. Mac is probably the fastest receiver on the team, and I would say one of the top 5 fastest receivers in the conference. So you're trying to stop a guy like that. And then Jalen Moss, who, as you mentioned, dominated Michigan, got a couple big catches on their All-American corner, Will Johnson. He is your prototypical number 1 receiver. He's of the ilk of a Jalen Cropper, right, because of his size. But I'd say that he is more likely to win a 50-50 ball than Cropper is, because Cropper was more of a burner. Moss is an all-around receiver. That's a great 2 receivers to start with. And then you got depth like Josiah Freeman is coming back from injury. And, hey, Raylan Sharp, don't sleep on this guy. Number 11 for Fresno State. He caught a touchdown at that Michigan game, and he's able to make any plays. Heck, he even picked up a fumble and ran it 50 yards last week because he's just an instinctual football player.
And then in terms of, preseason outlooks and, we're about a, fourth of the way into the season and all that. To me, it kind of felt like, I don't know if it was Fresno State being overlooked is the right word for it, but obviously the Boise hype train was going, and it's hard to argue against the Boise hype train. UNLV, very, very good case, just some kind of quarterback uncertainty there. Did fans feel kind of overlooked, in terms of the race for the Mountain West title and all that?
Well, you ask fans, they'll always say, we should be number 1. But, the realistic ones of them, they probably said to themselves, yeah, UNLV does bring back a lot. Even if they lost that quarterback to USC, they still have the other guy that was the starter before him, and they still have Ricky White. And, I can sing the praises of Boise and UNLV. They were in the Mountain West Championship game. However, Fresno State beat both of them last year and still missed the Mountain West Championship, due in part to what we still feel here, an inexcusable loss to New Mexico. Because they lost to the Lobos, they beat Boise and UNLV, but they have to sit behind them in a preseason poll because they weren't in the Mountain West Championship. If there is a bone to pick for Fresno State fans, it's that.
Yeah, that game, I was in Fresno for that, and it was kind of a weird game. Because you knew New Mexico had more of a shot just because Keene wasn't playing, right? You knew it was Logan Fife at quarterback, and you knew there was a better chance there, but it was still going to take a good deal for it to get going. And it felt like Fresno State was honestly just kind of sluggish through key parts of that game, and New Mexico just kind of kept hitting back. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt had a big day. And I talked to Devin Dampier, New Mexico's starting quarterback, yesterday about this. It's do you guys even talk about that game last year? Because you have so many new pieces on the team that weren't here for it. He's like, honestly, it hasn't been a huge talking point. No. How much of a talking point has that loss been for Fresno State this week?
Oh boy, we got it from the offense and defensive side. So Monday, I asked the offensive coordinator Pat McCann if there were any learning lessons from that game that he'll carry into this week, and he said of all the losses they had last year, and there were some ugly ones to San Jose State on the road, and then that one to New Mexico, and then there was one on the road to San Diego State too that he could have picked from, or the Wyoming loss. Right, there's 4 losses last year. He thought that the New Mexico defeat was the most personal for him because he got off script. He didn't call his best game. They got up early, like 14-3 or something like that, and they didn't score until the very end of the game. And that was only to, make it look prettier. By then, New Mexico already had the game intact. I was surprised to hear that because, I mean, you don't think these guys take losses personally. You think they just kind of move on to the next and they just flush it down, their brain toilet. But no, he actually still thinks about that game. Fresno State's offensive coordinator. He felt he didn't put his players in the best position to be successful. He felt that he left something out there. He tried calling plays that were for Mikey that, he couldn't do with Logan. He said that, he didn't recognize that there was a difference at quarterback and he didn't play to his quarterback strengths. He tried to make Logan fight Mikey Keene. So he has Mikey Keene this time. I'm sure it'll be easier for him to call plays with a healthy quarterback. And then the defense side, we talked to Devo Bridges, the defensive end for Fresno State, and they didn't stop the run at all. You brought up Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt. I didn't know who that guy was before that night, and now I'm following him in his career because I think he's a heck of a running back. He really, I think he put up 200-plus yards that night. He really impressed me just because of his explosive plays and the long runs that he put together. I think there was a touchdown he had before halftime that was, a highlight reel play. So does New Mexico have guys like that can potentially break a game open like Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt? Fresno State's preparing for it because they were embarrassed last year. That's the word that they used, Devo Bridges used. They were embarrassed to lose to New Mexico when all they had to do was win, and they were in the conference championship.
Before we kind of get to a kind of prediction of some sort, obviously there's another talking point that needs to be discussed. Fresno State, along with Colorado State, Boise State, and San Diego State, are headed to the Pac-12 or the rebuilt Pac-12 for the 26-27 academic year. The news was leaked last Wednesday night, and then on Thursday it was made official in the morning. What have you seen in terms of reaction from fans, players, coaches, all that, in terms of Fresno kind of taking some form of a step up to the Pac-12?
Positivity has been everywhere. You have some skeptics who are still curious what this Pac-12 will look like. I mean, you're kind of taking a risk anytime you go from a conference of 12 to now a conference of 6, and you're banking on getting 2 more members, but I still think they can. And if they can, then this is a slam dunk move for Fresno State because it will probably be a bit better media rights still than the Mountain West. That's kind of the reason they made the move so early, the Pac-12 did, so that way they could be first in line, having all of the notable brands that were once in the Mountain West. And it not only makes you more money in terms of a media rights deal, but more exposure. I know the Pac-12 doesn't look like it did 2 years ago, or even last year, but it still has the Pac-12 brand. It's still the Conference of Champions, as Bill Wallen would say, and it still has, I think, a special meaning to Fresno State fans, especially if they could somehow finagle Stanford and Cal. I don't know the likelihood of that. I'm not a realignment expert. I'm not Pete Thamel, but I could say if Stanford and Cal do end up in the Pac-12, that'll make this move well worth it. And even if they don't go to the Pac-12, you're still playing against all your rivals, Boise State, San Diego State, make a rivalry with Oregon and Washington State. Now, that's pretty good to have a conference of all of the football elites in the Mountain West, and then 2 former Power 5 schools.
Yeah, it feels, I mean, for the time being, and I'll say time being, maybe being the next 4 years or so, maybe 3, tremendously unlikely for Stanford and Cal to maybe hop back into the Pac-12. Just given
I thought you were actually going to say that you're going to come in, and you surprised me. That's so funny.
Yeah, no, it seems unlikely. But we've seen, like over the years, I mean, Boise fans I saw were just overjoyed with the move. San Diego State fans to a certain degree. Out of my own curiosity, because I don't know the fan base that well, I mean, were Fresno State fans always like, we would love to be a part of the Pac-12, or like this would mean a lot?
They were when the Pac-12 looked good. I mean, when USC and UCLA left, they were telling themselves, hey, maybe we're two of the teams that could be inserted in. And I don't know how close they were to actually being invited by Klyavkov, but it's still always been a dream for Fresno State fans, even if it is under these circumstances with 10 members gone from last offseason. They're still going to accept this invitation because it is better to be invited to the Pac-12 than not be invited, because who knows what happens to the Mountain West now. I mean, Air Force is getting poached by the American Athletic Conference, and from there, who knows which route UNLV goes or some of the other notable brands in the Mountain West. I think they're happy to leave Dodge before it gets really messy in the Mountain West, because I think with these 4 schools leaving that conference is now in a lot of instability, and it's vulnerable, like the Pac-12 was last year, to seeing other conferences poach their members.
Yeah, I mean, the report leaked yesterday for kind of context that Air Force is being targeted by the American Athletic Conference for expansion talks. That's something that they've kind of talked about before. I don't know how serious it is compared to prior conversations, but yeah, it feels like all eyes are kind of out east with the Pac-12 kind of making a move from Memphis or Tulane, and maybe looking at maybe South Florida or something like that, and then kind of circling back to UNLV and Nevada. But interesting times ahead, but we do have a game this weekend here in Albuquerque. I got to ask, I mean, what's your prediction for New Mexico, Fresno State, and why?
All right. So I talked a lot about, everything. Good job asking me about all things Fresno State. So you got Mikey Keene and Malik Sherrod, who are one of the better quarterback running back duos in the conference. I expect both of them to have big games. I'm not sure how solid this New Mexico defense is. I did see, T-Mac had a crazy game against them on ESPN, and Auburn, with the new quarterback, was able to get things going. I think that was like a freshman quarterback, too, for Auburn. So
redshirt freshman, yeah.
I think Fresno State has an offense comparable to a Power 4 based off of the skill players. But if the O-line, which could be without one of their key players, Mose Vaval, who injured himself against New Mexico State, if they're banged up, anything can happen. I'm banking on the O-line managing to hold its own even without Mose Vaval. I'm going to say Mikey and Malik have big games. I'm going to say it's another blowout win for Fresno State, just because I think New Mexico and New Mexico State are probably right next to each other. That should be a really close and fun game next week when the Aggies and Lobos play. But I don't think it'll be fun this week for the Lobos. I could see it being 41-7 Fresno State. If New Mexico does score more than 7, it's because they got a heck of a quarterback who can extend plays in Devin Dampier. So maybe like 41-7, but I'll take a mulligan if it's 41-14, maybe. 41. Can I get 2 scores? 41-7, 41-14?
Okay. We will take those here. We do not have any strict prediction rules. I do want to touch on, just because you brought it up, and a kind of this isn't a super clean ending, but Vaval, what is his injury in particular?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I heard about it at the press conference a couple of days ago, and I was like, I didn't know that guy was hurt, because here I am on TV just focusing on the quarterback. I didn't realize to pan down and see who's snapping him the ball at center. But he didn't practice yesterday, and we're recording this on a Wednesday, so he didn't practice on Tuesday. And so we'll still see if he's available, but doesn't look long-term. He was right in the mix with those guys, just not dressed out in pads. He's still in there coaching, and he was going through a lot of conditioning drills, but we'll see. I guess we'll see, because even if they don't have him this week, there's a bye week a couple weeks from now. He'll definitely be ready for October for sure, I think.
Okay. Well, that was Gabe Camarillo. He is a sports anchor and reporter for Fox 26 News in Fresno. Gabe, thank you for coming on today. We appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you for having me.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed our conversation with Gabe. Some good insight from him on, Fresno State and everything they kind of bring to town this weekend. But before we go, once again, just want to encourage you guys to, keep looking for the live shows that Jeff Grammer and I are doing on YouTube and X. Even if you don't catch us live, you'll be able to find replays on YouTube and X as well. So keep watching them. We enjoy doing them, even if they get a little bit loopy in the kind of post-game format sometimes. Some late nights kind of throws us off a little bit. And be sure to participate. If you have any questions about New Mexico sports, New Mexico football, conference realignment as well, because that is kind of the major talking point right now in college sports, be sure to drop them in the comments when we do those streams, and we will get to them the best we can. But that was another episode of Writer's Block. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and see you Saturday.
Thank you for joining us. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe, and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.